Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to today's presentation, Migration as a Determinant for Mental Health, Lessons Learned from Community-Based Research. Before we begin our presentation today, we would like to begin with an acknowledgement that N4 is hosted at CHEO, which is located in Ottawa, Ontario. Ottawa is built on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. The people of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia, and we honor them and this land. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. We also honor all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. My name is Colleen Drake. I am N4's Project Engagement Coordinator, and I will be hosting and moderating today's presentation with my colleague and co-host Andrew Tolmeyer, Education Coordinator, who will be behind the scenes monitoring the Q&A box. I am now pleased to introduce you to today's presenters. I am going to ask that you turn on your camera as I introduce you. Dr. Geoffrey Maina is an associate professor at the University of Saskatchewan. His program and research focuses on improving health outcomes of people experiencing diverse forms of marginalization, people living with HIV, immigrants, people living with diverse forms of mental illness and addiction, and victims of violence, both locally and globally. As a community-based researcher, he is committed to employing social justice principles that empower communities to be actively involved in the research process. He uses diverse community-based research methodologies and employ qualitative research methods such as art-based methods and methodologies that honor lived experience, such as patient-oriented research in his work. Through them, he democratizes both the research process, knowledge creation, and knowledge sharing. Dr. Nancy Clark is a qualitative health researcher at the University of Victoria. With a background in community mental health nursing, she conducts research in immigrant and refugee mental health with immigrant services and primary healthcare sectors across Canada. Nancy has a background in cultural psychiatry, community-based interventions, and critical qualitative health research, such as intersectionality. A practical interest in Nancy's work is healthcare, equity, social, and structural determinants of mental health, and how mental health services and systems work to promote better health. Welcome, Nancy and Geoffrey. I have just a few housekeeping slides and then we will begin. Today's session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our N4 platform. We will share this with you as soon as it becomes available. Should there be any technical issues during the presentation, we will inform you with details for an alternate makeup session. Before we begin today's event, I would like to take a moment to introduce you to our platform features to help enhance your participation experience. Throughout today's session, we invite you to write your questions in the Q&A window. We know that sometimes many of you might have the same questions or be interested in a particular response. Today, you have the option of upvoting a question, so please upvote questions you're interested in hearing the answer to, and we will prioritize those questions for our speakers today. Our presenters do not have any conflicts of interest to disclose. So with that said, let's jump right into today's presentation, and I will pass the virtual podium over to Geoffrey to get us started. Welcome, Geoffrey.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. As it has been introduced, my names are Geoffrey Maina, and I'll be sharing my screen here. Let me see. One. Okay, getting this organized there. Okay. Corinne, can you confirm that you're seeing the screen that doesn't have notes?
Absolutely, Geoffrey. We can just see your presentation.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So my name is Geoffrey Maina, and I am based out of Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, which is about 150 kilometers north of Saskatoon, which is the main campus of the University of Saskatchewan. So as a way of introduction has been done, so I'm not gonna take much of your time doing that. So I'm gonna go in straight to looking at the objectives that will be guiding our brief presentation. Number one, I'll be looking at the immigration-related intergenerational dynamics, a shift among newcomer families. Then I'll also be looking at the mental impact of interregional conflict, specifically looking at the youth, and then perhaps entertaining some ideas about what can we do in terms of intervention to make sure that the intergenerational conflicts are managed. So I will be drawing from my own story as a father, and as well as my my practice as a psychotherapist trainee to talk about what I think is a very important topic, which is the intergenerational conflict for immigrant population. So I am an immigrant and a father of two. So I have experiences raising two children. So the firstborn is 17 years old, and the second one is 13. And so they came to Canada when they were four years old and 3 months old, respectively. And so the old one can still remember experiences of living in Kenya and can tolerate cultural foods and understand some bits of Kiswahili. And so as you can see in this photo, which was taken about 2017 or thereabout, they're wearing some traditional clothing, but this is not the reality anymore because they no longer wear anything that has any semblance of where they're coming from. So I'll be unpacking some of the frictions that we have experienced with them as we have been raising them in a way of trying to make sure that perhaps they retain some elements of the parental culture and some of the strives there. And then, of course, building upon that, we'll be talking more about much more serious issues because if they're unmitigated, what kind of issues can arise as a result of that? So one of the things that I found interesting in raising immigrant children in Canada is about food war. So on the right side is a kind of a typical ethnic food that would cook occasionally, and on the left side is what they prefer to take. Of course, not that is quintessentially Canadian. It's a food that is well understood that everybody would take. And it's one of the things that my children have always struggled to appreciate is the fact that, you know, none of the people that they know is eating that kind of food that we eat. And so they kind of just feel that they want to eat as much food that the rest of the friends are taking. And so in a way, as we try to preserve our culture through ethnic food cooking, we can imagine that, you know, the food that we have to cook, we cook from scratch, taking a lot of effort. And of course, it's oftentimes labor intensive. And so when the children prefer to eat Canadian food, it can sometimes be a source of tension. And oftentimes, even as late as yesterday, we had made some ethnic food, and my son chose to make his own food. So we occasionally find ourselves having to cook the food that we want to cook, and then our children still preferring to cook separate food because they don't want to engage with ethnic food. The other piece that have been of great interest has been on social media. And so everybody has Instagram, they would say. Everybody has iPhone 13, or they have Spotify and all those pieces. And so it's been quite interesting to try and negotiate when and how, what kind of social media account they should have. And so, you know, restricting internet use, just trying to do what we need to do. But I think the challenge has always been in many ways that because other children have, they don't be left out. And so how do we navigate the boundaries and making sure that the children don't feel left out? So I would say in many ways, I think having or not having social media has been one of the areas that sometimes can cause a lot of tension around the house. And there's no one size fits all. And we even see the differences between the two children in terms of what kind of boundaries they will need there. Another issue that have been of interest is sleepover and having, you know, the Christmas gift and stuff like those. And so just trying to help them appreciate that, sleepover is not something that should be done or should not encourage. Who should you go with? And the rules that we have around the house is that, for us to accept somebody to come over for sleepover, or even for us to let the children go out for sleepover, we need to know the parents, they need to know us. And so sometimes, there have been quite a bit of pressure there, children putting pressure, saying that, we have made arrangements to go for sleepover, we need to go. And sometimes, we feel very uncomfortable there about, we don't know where they are going. And another issue there is about the Christmas gifts. Sometimes if the gift is not costing a three-figure dollar amount, sometimes it's not good enough. So some of the realities there of trying to adjust to the reality of raising children in Canada. Another piece there that has been of great interest is trick or treating. Like, my just wondering, when should he be too old to not go for trick or treating? And so yesterday we had a conversation with my son, who is 13. He says, Dad, you must compensate me for all the years you told me that I'm too old to go for trick or treating. So I'm expected to buy him some candies that that he feels that I have denied him opportunity to go and gather, because every time he goes out, he'll always get about 3 pillowcases of candies that he brings home. And other things also, he's been putting pressure sometimes on us to get pets. And so we still are not pet people yet. And so it's a very interesting conversation there as to when and how, what kind of pet should he have and should he have around the house. And so I put this photo there, kind of a demonstration of the divide between parents and children of immigrants. And so in a way, acculturation is thinking about the degree to which individuals have embraced the dominant society and the extent to which they have retained their original culture. So in my own little story, it's kind of just showing the tension ourselves as immigrants wanting to retain as much as possible our own ethnic identity, which is manifested in the way we dress, in what we eat, and kind of language that we speak, versus the dominant culture, which is really dictating and shaping the experience of our children. And so what research shows and study shows is that when there's a gap between the acculturation, which is the embracing of the dominant culture, between the children and the parents, there's a high possibility of a conflict when that arises. And so immigrant children are all in when it comes to embracing dominant culture. And then, of course, they also find themselves also trapped in what we call the in-between culture, which, of course, they are being put under pressure to pledge allegiance to the parents' culture, where at the same time, they're also being put under a lot of pressure to wanting to belong to the dominant culture. And so when parents do not realize the dynamics that are at play with the children, when they demand conformity, that can really be a source of conflict. So whereas in my situation, we have not, our conflict or kind of tension has not spilled out into the public needing therapy, in the course of my work as a psychotherapist trainee, I did actually get to interact with an individual who came to me when he was 16 years old in grade 11, being a family of 5 and a firstborn. He came to Canada more or less the same age as my child. And the first interaction with the counselor was because of his suicidal ideation. And so because the counselor could not help him, he came to our agency for help because of the persistent suicidal ideation. And so when we did the assessment, the major issue that we discovered was going on is that the parents were having unrealistic expectations for him. And so there's a constant conflict between him and his parents. The parents were trying to micromanage him, and there was a lot of pressure to conform to the culture of the ethnic country. And so we started working on some of the pieces that he needed to work on. But then what was really surprising is that exactly a week later, he returned to therapy and he was in suicidal mode. And indeed, he had a suicidal plan. And so trying to think about what was going on there as we unpacked the issues of therapy. So Duke was under pressure. I call him Duke, was under pressure from parents to perform in school first and foremost. And even getting 96%, which was his average, was not good enough. Not only that, he was also involved in extracurricular activities. He was in band, he was in acting, in martial arts. And also the parents were having issues, marital issues, and oftentimes he was parentified, meaning that parents would confide some of the things he was not supposed to know, the conflict that they were having. And oftentimes, because the parents were very busy, which is not uncommon to immigrants' parents there. He found himself raising his siblings as well. And so he would report that he had experienced emotional abuse from the parents. And so, you could see the kind of the title of the tiger parents could easily have fit in their situation. And so, of course, the burden of watching over the siblings and even not being given an opportunity to become a child himself was actually a source of conflict in such a way that he felt that he didn't want to live anymore. So to be at a point where such kind of a crisis has happened as a result of a conflict between a child and the parents is very concerning. And so when I was looking at literature, I was interested to try and understand what does literature say about the source of conflict. So the source of conflict oftentimes between immigrants and their children, it's all about the routes that are to be followed. And so in the majority culture, these 4 items oftentimes are negotiated. But for many immigrants, the parents are not always flexible with this. And so a lot of them has to do with the issues of autonomy. And so the question is that at what age are you supposed to be seen as an adult by the parents and they let you be without being on your case all the time? And the other question is also about the preferred culture. Are you Canadian first or are you immigrant? Are you ashamed of the culture of your parents or not? And how do you represent it? Are you expected to retain the cultural value system of the country you're coming from? And the other piece there that's also very critical is, can you date before you turn 18? And even if you choose to do that, how far can you go if you choose to date? Can you bring a girlfriend or a boyfriend home? What is acceptable and what's not acceptable? And another factor is, can you go out to a party at night? And when you do, when do you come home? So you see, immigrants in their home country did not have to negotiate these things, as the parents' rules were supreme and they were to be obeyed without questions. And so what ended up happening is that when the children come to a place like Canada, they want to negotiate these rules. And when there's inflexibility, of course, this can be a lot of problems. And so then what then we get to see is that when most immigrants, the conflict is not negotiated properly between the parents and the children, they are likely to have very significant mental implications. And so, and the problem is that newcomers growing up and raising children in Canada, they don't have the same social support available to them. Like for instance, a kid having an extended family members like uncle or auntie to run to if there's trouble at home. And so because they don't have any way of escape, they're more likely to feel alienated, depressed, have anxiety, and also are likely to present with a myriad of psychosocial symptoms. And so in the society, as minority, they also struggle with identities because they're still trying to make sense of who they are. And they're more likely also to experience marginalization. And the point is that all the while, the parents may not be aware that the children themselves are managing the relationship dynamics between themselves as parents, and the youth are also managing other dynamics as well that are happening to them outside. And so, conceptually speaking, you think about intergenerational cultural dissonance. So this is where the parent and the children, they recognize that there's a conflict happening. And so if you look at this presentation here, is that a recognition of a conflict happening is likely to bring them to a place where they can resolve them, whether it's going through therapy or otherwise. And when the conflict is resolved, they are likely to be bonding. But if the conflict is not resolved, if they don't go to a way of resolution, you see that the one who loses is always the youth. So the one that is at a precarious situation, whenever the conflict between the youth and the parents are not resolved or addressed, will always be the youth. So the biggest loser is actually the youth. And you can imagine their brain is still developing. And usually a lot of mental illnesses start manifesting themselves right about the age of 18 to about 21. So you can actually see the precarious situation that the youth is likely to face in the event that these issues are not addressed. And so when conflict arises like those ones, where the youth are in a crisis like the one I talked about, and so sometimes it's very easy to use the Canadian systems to address some of the problems. And one of the things that I have come to appreciate, even hearing from other people, that the Canadian approach to address the parent-child conflict with the immigrant population, where we rush to involve social workers, or even to say, you can call 911. so that they can report the children, they can report the parents to the authorities. It's not always culturally safe or sensitive, because newcomers come from a country where they have a mistrusting relationship with authorities, and so for that, in addition to that, as well as having conflicting value systems, where Canadian and ethnic countries, they don't have a common understanding of what constitutes a conflict between a child and a parent. And so for Canadians, systems or value system might be different. And for parents from many countries around the world may not perceive some of the things that are considered as conflict. And so, and then the other piece to that also need to be very clear is understanding the impact of agencies' interventions. Like for instance, if the social worker perceives the child is unsafe, removing the children from homes that are deemed to be unsafe to foster home, for instance, just even paying attention to what that looks like and what is likely to be the mental well-being of the children themselves and even the future relationship with the family. I want to say that this is not a very easy solution, and I put this kind of a picture as a reminder of the cost of inaction. And so there are likely to be a lot of abuse that youth are experiencing that don't come to the attention of authorities. And so we know the story of the Shafir murder situation, which the mother and the son killed their daughters and siblings because they were thought to have brought shame to the family. And I think this should always serve as a reminder that the acculturation gap can get out of hand. And unfortunately, the Canadian systems are not always robust enough to prevent these occurrences. So I think the piece there is always make sure that we are doing enough research that can really help and prepare us to preempt some of those things from happening. And so I think I add this piece there, and I think wondering whether I've jumped a slide that I needed to talk about. I think there's a slide that I'm missing. Andrew, Andrew, can you pull in a slide there about the interventions? I think there's a slide that I'm missing, if you don't mind, that I wanted to talk about briefly about the intervention that we can put in place. I don't know why it's not showing up.
Okay.
There's one slide there that I think is not in my deck here that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, exactly, that one. Okay, thank you very much. So is a way to say, just having talked about the reality of inaction, what can we do then to support newcomer youth? And so one of the things that I'm very clear of, and I'm persuaded based on my own lived experiences of hearing about other parents raising and the struggles of raising children, as well as my work as a psychotherapist, is that we should always anticipate that there will be a concentration gap that is likely to cause conflict between parents and the youth. And that because of that, the newcomer youth are at heightened risk of mental illnesses. And so, and because the youth, they get opportunity to develop trusting relationship with adults at school, who are likely to become role models, there's an opportunity there for the coaches, for the teachers, for the counselors to actually get close and to begin to get hints, especially when those newcomer youth are in distress. And so these role models can actually become a source of social support that the youth can be able to lean on. But much more importantly, I think settlement agencies need to invest in parenting strategies to integrate, to help them integrate with the Canadian value system. And this is to say that immigrant parents really need to understand the dynamics of having to raise their children in Canada compared to the differences in raising them in their home countries. And another thing that I'm also very concerned about that I think we should begin to talk about is the importance of mainstreaming psychotherapy for newcomer youth. So given that we do not do a good job of capturing the prevalence of mental illnesses among the ethnic and minority population, we should always anticipate there will always be distress because of the many things that the youth are confronted with. And so I think making psychotherapy preemptive and an opportunity for them to be able to access that as a way of prevention should be prioritized. And finally, I think we need to keep on doing more research to understand better culturally safe ways in which we can be able to manage intergenerational conflict, especially between parents and children, knowing that it's likely to happen, it's likely to be unreported, and the parents may not have the skill set that may need to raise their children in a safe way. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Dr. Nancy Clark, to carry on with her presentation about the work that she's doing with the immigrant and refugee communities.
Thanks so much, Geoffrey. Sorry about that pause. I'm just sharing my screen. Thank you so much for that really informative presentation, which really leads nicely into this next discussion. My name is Nancy Clark, and I will also be speaking to you today about
Nancy,
migration.
sorry to interrupt. We just have your notes on screen, so we'll just have you switch to presenter view.
Okay, pardon me.
No worries.
Just at the top where it says display settings, you can swap. Excellent.
Okay. So I've lost my notes. That's fine. Okay, so thanks everyone for your patience and for that lovely presentation, Geoffrey. It really fits well with what I'm about to present today. Just before I start, I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. It's the territory in which the university stands, as well as the other groups here, including the Songhees, the Esquimalt and Wasanish people, whose relationship to the land continues to this day, especially here in South Vancouver Island. So what I'm going to be talking about today, I do also have a short agenda. I'm also going to be drawing attention to a case study, but I'm going to focus more on the process of community engaged research. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the background for the project that I'll also present as a case study, and talking about a methodology called community-based participatory action research, what that process is in terms of mobilizing knowledge, and then what some of the findings from our project showed in terms of calls to action. And I'll conclude with some hopefully lessons learned, or maybe things to think about around barriers and facilitators around how do we do research in a good way. So just to begin, this project was funded by Social Science Research Council, Humanities Research Council of Canada. It was titled Exploring Syrian Men's Mental Health and Participation in Employment. And it was to use community-based approaches using photo voice. And the inspiration for the project really came from a discussion with the settlement sector that found we had a community lunch meeting with academics and settlement service providers saying, you know what, our Syrian families are struggling, and particularly around employment and the employment of fathers and the men. And so I started looking around at the literature, and I found that, yes, indeed, that specifically Syrians that have resettled in Canada experience a lot of labor integration challenges. But those challenges actually happen pre-settlement, pre-resettlement. For example, Syrians living in Lebanon and other host countries also experience labor employment challenges. And that we know that labor attachment is significant to men's identity and their work and sense of belonging. And so that attachment also correlates with experiences of mental health, things like isolation, loneliness, feeling like you're not good enough, things like that. And yet at the same time, given those challenges, there are lots of barriers and stigma around mental health. And as Geoffrey mentioned, there's a need to sort of provide culturally safe, responsive services, and yet at the same time, there's a huge amount of stigma for families. So that was sort of the inspiration for this community-based project. And in terms of the methodology, I really tried to develop the project with community-based participatory action principles in mind. And that means I was hoping to co-design a project that was meaningful to the settlement sector, that could inform their programs, but also to include peer researchers, or sometimes referred to as people with lived experience, that have community-based knowledge, lived experience knowledge, and that could also have certain skills to facilitate the research. And the idea was to co-create something, but also to privilege the knowledge of the community, meaning that as an academic, I don't have the monopoly of what constitutes knowledge. So it was really trying to meet the community where it's at. Also, I took an intersectionality perspective that was from me as an academic, which meant that I was interested to find out, so in addition to migration, what are the other factors, or what are the other determinants that shape Syrian men's mental health and well-being in this context? So relationality was about what are those, how do those factors relate in terms of how men are positioned in terms of their experience of forced migration, their gender identity, etc. And that intersectionality also tries to look from the ground up. What are the social structures there then that support Syrian men's integration to employment, for example, with the aims of drawing attention to social justice issues while understanding complexity. So in order to do that, I decided to embark on a photo voice project. So that, again, came from me as an academic, not necessarily the settlement worker or the community themselves. I was reading, I have the luxury and privilege of reading what kinds of things could work to talk to men about mental health. And so we thought that, I thought that we could do both photo elicitation, which are interviews with people after they've taken photographs, to talk individually with them about what the meaning of the photographs are, in a way to get to know them in a more intimate way, versus photo voice is a group. It's kind of like a focus group, where once you've collected some data or some photographs, you come together to discuss, how do you want to use that information for change or to create knowledge? And so our project really had 3 phases. We had phase 1, which was really about developing partnerships, relationships, and trust with the community. We developed an advisory group where we met 4 times during the process of 2 years. So the grant was for 2 years. And like I said, we also we also kind of had a community meeting before we actually even got the grant going. And this allowed us to understand what our roles were, what the partnerships were, allowed us to recruit participants, and also allowed us to engage in that dialogue about what was expected to happen and when. Following that, then we were able to recruit 11 Syrian participants, Canadian Syrian men with experience of forced migration. And those 11 participants stayed with us for 2 years. We worked together for 2 years. And the peer researchers were also part of the 11 participants. So phase 2 was about analysis, meaning making, doing the photo elicitation. We did the photo elicitation interviews took about 1.5 hours to 2 hours. They were all done in Arabic except one. So translation needed to happen. And then also we did photo voice group community meetings, where we had learning how to actually conduct, how to do photographs. And then we created a workbook where we gave men back their photographs and put them in a workbook that corresponded to some of the themes we were seeing in the data and in the analysis. And then finally, our last attempt was to think about in that phase 3 in our last photo voice workshop. How are we going to use the knowledge to mobilize change? So some of the findings, and of course, because this is photo voice participatory action, normally I would have the participants here speaking to you today and showing their photographs, but because of the objectives of this presentation, I'm just going to focus on the process. And what we found was that there were 5 key themes, ideas that came up in the photographs and in the text that men spoke about. Language barriers won't be a surprise to you. Many of you working here with newcomer communities, in that many men talked about language being a barrier to employment. And so most men, the 11 participants in the project, were engaged in lower wage employment or service work because they didn't have time to go to language classes, despite the fact that their Canadian benchmarks were a level 6, which is good conversational English, but not necessarily reading and writing skills at that same level. And so men felt the language was a really huge barrier to gaining meaningful employment. Also, time and stage of life. So the disruption that happens when people are forced to migrate means that men felt they didn't have enough time to catch up. They were worried about their life savings. How are they going to have a pension when professional careers were disrupted, when their education was disrupted? So for example, the average age of the participants in this project was 40. People had already established occupations and professions. And for some of the younger men, also they had their education disrupted. So these factors impacted their work, their employment, and also whether or not they were able to engage in language classes. Most of the participants talked about isolation, feeling isolated and lonely, not only outside of work, but a lot of men arrived as, sorry, not a lot, a few men arrived as single men and younger men without that family attachment and without extended family. Other men with families felt increasingly lonely and isolated within the context of their work setting environment. For example, driving a delivery truck for long hours, even driving an Uber, still felt lonely and isolated at the intersection of language. Belonging and identity was key for all of the participants, and again, tied to that pre-migration profession and employment. And out of the 11 men, only 2 were working in their chosen professions and occupations. And so this also won't be a surprise that many of the men experienced decredentialing, where they were told they didn't have a Canadian experience, or their Canadian or their experiences weren't recognized by Canadian certificates. So this need to belong and identity, Syrian men specifically in this project really ground their identity as fathers. Geoffrey talked about, parenting and fatherhood and the pressures that families feel. Also in this project, the same was talked about, and men needing a need to belong. This all created what I call a gender-based stress for men specifically, and the fact that they called this experience feeling under pressure, sometimes so unwell that they needed to take pills or medication to alleviate symptoms. And men felt pressure to provide remittances to families left not in Canada, as well as to earn a sufficient high income to survive in Canada. And so several of those findings also lead us to calls to action. So in terms of language, the men discussed having more opportunities for conversational English within their places of work would increase their sense of belonging and also increase their language skills and literacy skills. and to address the pressure of time, to look at what educational skills, what skills men bring already. And there's instruments like the WES, which actually tests skills of what newcomers bring versus having a Canadian experience. And I've got some of those resources at the end of this slide. Having peer buddies or mentorship when men are trying to engage in work is found to be really helpful. And a surprising finding by this study, or maybe not as surprising, is that although there's a lot of stigma around mental health, all of the men in this project talked about how beneficial it was just creating space and coming together to share their experiences, provided this was a very heterogeneous, very different sample. I can't say the word right now. Heterogeneous sample, and none of them knew each other before this project. So that was very interesting, that men were able to open up about their experiences through this group and through peer support. And so those were the main calls to action. And of course, with community-based participatory action research, we want to mobilize knowledge in different ways. And sometimes that means non-academic ways. The peer support, the peer researchers, the men in the project developed a brochure with me and the research team, How Can Photography Help Refugee Men Talk About Their Mental Health? We also developed an activity sheet if you were going to plan this kind of project, and photo voice, how could you do it with men and boys? And then we also co-developed a video with 3 of the participants that were willing to share their experience with the broader community, and which is open access. And then finally, we developed a digital storybook with all of the photographs and all of the narrated voices of the men that correspond to the themes and photographs, so that we could share that with communities around how to make employment more inclusive for Syrian men. There is a photo gallery which can be accessed on my website, and we're trying to make that open access in a repository currently. And of course, there is an academic paper that has just been submitted and is under review on a special section talking about migrant health and newly emerging public health issues, drawing attention to men, masculinity, labor employment, and the impacts to men's mental health, particularly men that have experienced forced migration. And so did this community-based research work well? There's never a right way or necessarily a wrong way. I would say that start very early in the process. Think about whether the research, whose needs is it meeting? Is it meeting the community needs? How can mutual needs be addressed? Sometimes developing a memorandum of understanding during community advisory meetings is very helpful. Also thinking about how can the sectors use the research for their programs to support newcomers, some of the same issues that Geoffrey was discussing. Decide what methods promote the best impact or voice. Was photo voice necessarily the best method? In some ways it was, in other ways it actually complicated the analysis. It made it more complex, but in other ways also more engaging. And also topics like mental health that are very stigmatizing can be discussed as social determinants of mental health. So when you talk to people about employment or social support, people understand that. And I think grounding those discussions that way was very helpful for developing trust and opening up. And working with peers, peer researchers takes time, it takes flexibility, and financial support as well. So those are the kinds of things that could be helpful to promote community-based research project that you're thinking about, or maybe you have some other other ideas you want to share as well. And I've just posted here some two resources that I think really help me. Access Alliance, you may know of it, has excellent tools for developing community-based research for social change, and outlines some of those tensions and barriers that can happen when academics want to work with community organizations, or community organizations want to work with academics. And also the Community-Based Research Canada, creating community-led knowledge resources, is also very helpful. So I want to thank you for your time for listening. I also want to thank Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council for supporting the project, Options Community Services BC, which partnered on the project. And lastly, a big thank you to the 11 men that participated in the project, as well as our peer researchers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nancy. And thank you both, Geoffrey and Nancy, for your presentations. I think we have some questions coming in from the audience, so we will jump into those. Nancy, it looks like there's a question regarding the project. So obviously you've done the focus on men, and they were just wondering, because the information has been so interesting, if there is a study running looking at women and that female perspective.
It's an excellent question. Most of my work has been with women and girls, and the reason why I chose to focus on men and masculinity in this was because when we would work with Syrian women, and I've also worked with Karen women with refugee backgrounds that were settled here in the early 2000s, all of them started talking about the fathers and the men, and I didn't have an opportunity to talk with them. So there's a lot of research that talks about the vulnerability of women and girls, which is necessary. And I would say that those vulnerabilities are different than men. There's a gap in research around men and their vulnerabilities, particularly men that have experienced forced migration, and that's primarily due to masculinity. And so there's also evidence to suggest that men, they don't have the resources available to support them. And even if they did, there's a lot of stigma about going in and saying, hey, I need some help because I have to take care of the family. That's my role. And so that was why the focus on men in this project. And if we look at the IOM global migration patterns, it's no longer a feminized pattern. We're now seeing a more of a masculinized pattern, meaning that more of the migration, the single migration that's happening, is with men that have experienced war and trauma and continue to experience discrimination.
Thank you, Nancy. And just because this question sort of ties in, and then we will jump to some of the questions that have come in for Geoffrey's work as well. So do you see newcomers, especially men, and I'm thinking you do, hesitating to reach out for supports to advance their career goals in Canada? So they're hesitating to look at those supports, and they're, sticking with what they feel is comfortable in their situation, but they have so many opportunities, they're just not going after those.
That's an interesting question, and it came up when we had our community advisory dialogues, and that was also an interesting tension because the settlement sector certainly provides a lot of programming and support for men and families, and that's not the issue. The issue is that men are struggling and that there's not enough time, and yet there's a lot of pressure. And so there's this notion of social capital, that I can find work faster through my social networks, whether they be in Canada or outside of Canada. So, for example, men were very eager to obtain their citizenship status so that they could go back, do transnational work, because they were not able to find those employment experiences here. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but Yeah, it's just there's a huge pressure, and so what we find is a lot of men in particular, and it's gendered different in globally. Here, I believe in Canada, it's gendered where you see more men in that service-based industry, like the gig economy or platform-based work, because it's more flexible. But even though that has its advantages, you can make money fast, you don't need to speak good English, it also simultaneously disadvantages because there's no upgrading from there.
Right. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much, Nancy, for sharing. And if anyone has any follow-up questions related to that, please, by all means, pop it in the Q&A. We have questions coming in, but we have very limited time with our presenters. So I just want to let everyone know that if we don't get to your question on air, we will answer those after our presentation today. So thank you very much for sharing your questions. And I think I have one now for Geoffrey. So Geoffrey, can you discuss whether you found any next connections between the socioeconomic status of newcomer parents and the index for their children? And that is in the Q&A box if you need to take a closer look at that.
I don't know what they mean with index, but I can suspect what they're asking about, whether there's any correlation between socioeconomic status and the kind of the intercultural conflict, intergenerational conflict there. So generally speaking, there will always be, it's going to manifest differently, depending on different reasons and different factors. But one of the things I can say is that for many immigrants who are, say, in high achieving socioeconomic situation, they are likely to put their children under a lot of pressure. And I'll give an example about, there's a work that we are doing with an immigrant physician who is a resident, and he was telling me about how almost all the medical students that they were studying together in medical school at the University of Saskatchewan who are ethnic minorities, a lot of them are struggling with mental illnesses because they are being forced to take medicine, particularly if the parents are medical doctors. And so the idea of making sure that you are overachieving, even trying to being put under pressure to achieve even more than your own parents there. So the conflict is gonna manifest differently depending on so many factors, and the country of origin, the culture, the community expectations, whether parents want to live out their identities precariously through their children. But then on the other flip side of things, parents who are socioeconomically disadvantaged are more likely to either not be spending enough time with their children because they have to work maybe a couple of jobs. And so there's a risk there of parentification, or older children raising the other younger children there, or kind of parental neglect there as well. And the other piece is there, of course, not being able to provide supervisory support to the children. And so you're likely to see children then maybe engaging in risky behaviors, maladaptive behaviors, whether it's starting to use substances or getting hooked to internet. Porn addiction, we are beginning to see that becoming a little bit common there. So it's no one size fits all. It's very different depending on so many factors.
Mm-hmm. I have one more question that sort of ties into that, Geoffrey, and then we'll jump to some for Nancy. Do you find that there are resources and services available easily, I guess, to help newcomers cope with the generational conflicts between children, youth, and their parents? And are these culturally focused? Do they take that into consideration with these supports?
I haven't done kind of environmental scan on the services available, but when I look at the websites of the many settlement services, settlement agencies, resources, there isn't really much. And for those, they are not really focused on addressing the disparities in acculturation. And so settlement agencies, for most part, they focus a lot on settlement and integration. And even when there's parenting support, because of the limited understanding of those dynamics, I was looking at any research that is done in Canada. We don't have a lot of research done in Canada about the intergenerational conflict. A lot of the research is coming out of America. And the challenge is that because there's not much empirical evidence for Canadian situation, there are usually oftentimes not in incentives that that programs do for evidence. And the problem is even bigger, that Canada does not collect race-based data on so many aspects, whether it's mental health, substance use and addiction. Immigrant health research is very disparate, quite wide, and we don't have a lot of coverage on all of the aspects. So I would say there's limited understanding of what is going on. Immigrants are very busy trying to raise their children. Children are very busy with all the things that are happening to them, struggling, and time is lapsing. We only get to hear more about the struggles when things have gone wrong. And the other piece is there also is that parents may struggle or not want to come out and share their frustrations because of stigma. There's an expectation that the parents are the families are supposed to be doing well, and so whenever there's a family struggle, they are not likely to be open because the stigma is huge in the community. So the services are not there, and if they are there, they're not culturally appropriate. And chances are that even people who are providing that kind of service may not necessarily be culturally safe or culturally competent.
Thank you so much, Geoffrey. I can't believe our hour has gone by so quickly. I think we have enough time for one more question. So Nancy, I'll direct it to you, and then I'll just do a couple of closing slides and leave some time to have your last comment. So Nancy, are there plans to look at other populations that are experiencing a refugee crisis? So is that in the works as well?
Good question. I was reading the other question about principles of community-based
Thank you.
research,
Yes,
but that's
so many
okay.
coming in. Yeah, or jump to
Uh,
whichever one you'd like, Nancy, and we can answer whichever.
Please, yeah, I'll try to answer both. Please share the slides. At the end of my slides, there's resources on principles on community-based research around co-ownership, equitable partnerships, and those kinds of issues. So please look to that. In answering this question, there are plans to do a global study that includes countries in the global south, as well as the global north on men and migration. So that is in the works, and this is around diverse men that are migrating. There's also untold stories where some men that have traveled by themselves have been left on certain islands in the globe, and not been able to access citizenship, for example, off the coast of Australia. And so we want to try and highlight those stories to talk about these experiences, but also to show the vulnerability there, because I think that when we start to unpack those things, those structures that maintain masculinity in a negative way, we start to better understand gender-based violence and mental health, substance use, and things like that. So there are plans at work to extend this sort of project to look with more diverse men. But interestingly enough, I suspect we will find similar experiences despite the diversity. So again, it's going to those structural conditions when we look at racism, classism, colonialism, those kinds of things. So I hope that answers your question, but please feel free to reach out if not.
We will put you in contact, Nancy. Thank you. Thank you both. Again, thank you, Nancy and Geoffrey, for taking time to participate in today's presentation. And I'm sending thanks out to the audience for joining us today and engaging with us. We hope that you will join us at future events, and hopefully Nancy and Geoffrey will take part in those at some future webinars. We have 2 coming up in the next little bit. And as we mentioned, we have recorded today's presentation, so you're welcome to take a look at that on the N4 platform and take part in meeting plays. We've also curated several resources. So today's presentation on this topic is available, and those are there for you. Following today's session, you'll be invited complete a survey, and we encourage you to share this feedback with us. It's obviously to improve our webinars and have these opportunities. So we ask you to follow that link. If you haven't already, check out the N4 mobile app available on Apple and Android devices through our QR code, and you can go to newcomernavigation.ca/iOS or Android. And thank you again, and we hope you can join us at a future N4 event. And with that, I will put it back to Nancy and Geoffrey if you'd like to leave our audience with any other information before we sign off today.
No, thanks everyone for the opportunity. As usual, we just start talking and
Fantastic.
yeah, and we'll share our resources. They're located at the end of the slides. Thank you again.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Nancy.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming, and we look forward to more conversations. But for sure, if you have any question, we will share our contacts and you can reach out to us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again, Geoffrey and Nancy. Everyone have a lovely afternoon.